So year-old argument has been whether you should buy an hard drive or buying an SSD makes a more logical sense. Now there are countless videos on internet explaining what is SSD and how it is better than conventional hard drives. Now if you have seen Linus's video, you are all set. You don't need to see any other videos. But as the saying goes, there is always something to learn from everyone. And here I am explaining you in layman's terms.
Stop! Can you stop calling everyone a layman, dude?
My motive is to help you make a decision according to your requirement and your budget. And I promise you, if you stick till the end, you will have no more doubt choosing between a hard disk and an SSD. Hey everyone, you are watching InfoPal and this is Parth explaining you hard disk versus SSD in layman's terms.
Magnetic tapes at a rate of 12.
But today, for the first time ever,
boundary between the device and the screen hard to discern.
No, I'm not a writer.
Okay.
If I find my way home, yeah. Wouldn't it be crazy? But you still amaze me.
Now before jumping on to what to choose, let us figure out how actually a hard disk and an SSD works. Now I will go a little bit in depth in terms of technical aspect. So if you don't want that, you can go to below timestamp. But I would suggest you stick around. I guarantee you it will be worth it. So let's begin, shall we? So let's start with the hard drives. So how does a hard drive work? It actually uses a very simple phenomenon known as magnetism. Now most of you know computer uses binary language, either 0 or 1. And using these two digits, it defines everything, even the most complex things. Now let's bring magnetism in this. Now it is a known fact, any magnetic material can be either magnetic or not. Now hard disk uses same property to store 1 and 0. Now inside a hard disk, there is a revolving disk made of magnetic material. This disk is made up of very small spaces. If that small space is magnetically aligned, then it is 1, otherwise it is 0. This small space is called bit, which either stores a 0 or 1. So if we have to store a letter A, which in binary can be defined as 0, 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, it will take up 8 bits. But all this activity is achieved by mechanical movement. On the other hand, SSD does not have any mechanical moving parts and there is no magnetic element in there. It's made of small transistors which are arranged in rows and columns. When a series of transistors conducts current, its value is 1. If not, then it is 0. It works almost like RAM, but it is non-volatile. That means it will retain data when power is disconnected. I think it's getting a bit too technical here. So let's simplify things. Case 1. Suppose your work area has a table and a separate storage area for your files, and to access the storage area, you have to physically move. Case 2. Suppose your work area has a work table and another adjacent table where you keep your files. So in case 1, no matter how fast you try to move, there is a limitation. Where in case 2, you can just pick a file from your adjacent table. In case 1, there is always a chance to face an accident and you stop working. But in case 2, that chance is less unless you break the table. Also in case 1, you spend a lot of energy and generate heat. But in case 2, those are lot less. But once the file is in work table, there is not much difference. I think you already guessed it right. Case 1 is hard disk drive and case 2 is an SSD. So a solid state drive is much faster accessing the files. It is less prone to damage and it uses less power. But once the application is loaded on your work table, which is called RAM in your computer, it hardly matters. Now as a user, how do you define whether you need a hard disk or SSD? Or SSD should be your only choice? Not quite, and I'll tell you why. If your need includes any productivity apps extensively like Microsoft Office, where every day, every hour, you need to update documents, which means constantly you are opening the file and then updating the document and saving the file. But if you occasionally use those things or use Google Docs instead, you can get away with a hard disk. Now, second use case. If your use includes using creativity tools like photo or video editing software, that means you are constantly pulling data from your storage and adding data to your storage. Using an SSD will give you much better experience over an hard drive. Now, if you are someone who works on 3D modeling like I do, again you are frequently saving the part you have modeled, and that leads to adding data to your storage, and it's better to go for a SSD. Now let's consider some adverse use cases like gaming. Here the application or the game depends on the storage on 3 occasions: when you launch the game, when you close the game, and when you save the game during gameplay. Now this is only about 5% of the entire gameplay. Other 95% of the time the gameplay runs on your random access memory. So hard disk may take longer time to load the game, but the gameplay experience remains unharmed. Also, games include a lot of game data, so a larger storage is always preferable over a faster storage. Again, if your use includes only watching movie and browsing internet, you can get away with a hard disk. But even in those use cases, things you can't get away with are boot time, app launch time, but still it is totally justified if you're on tight budget and need more space, and also fall under these categories. Now I will talk everything in Indian rupees, and my research has been mostly in Indian markets, but the idea stays the same even if you are from a different geography or currency. So if your budget is 10,000 rupees, you can go for a 1TB SSD, which will set you good for quite some time. Now if your budget is 75,000 Indian rupees, you can go for a 500GB SSD or a 250GB SSD and a 1TB hard drive. If you are a gamer, go for the second option, else you stick to the first option. Now what if budget is lesser, around 5,000 rupees? This is where pairing an SSD with a hard disk makes more sense for everyone, so you don't lose speed of application and also storage space. So I would rather suggest you configure your storage with a minimum of 128GB of SSD and 1TB of hard disk. Now let's go further down. What if your budget is only 3,000 rupees? So here you have to sacrifice either speed or storage space. If you take my opinion, I would rather sacrifice the storage space, because installing a hard drive in an SSD equipped device is much more easier than adding an SSD on a HDD equipped device. Because obviously when you add SSD, you want your operating system on your SSD, but in case you are adding an additional hard drive, you don't want that. You just want your space for your excess data. It eliminates the complications of cloning your operating system. But if your motive is just gaming, so you need a lot of space for your game data, so you can go for a hard disk instead of an SSD. That's everything from my side. So let me hear what you think in the comment section. Also, like the video if you appreciate my work, and definitely share this video with your friends and family so they can also learn how to choose wisely. Until next time, this is Parth signing off from Infopal, and you have a great time.